Welcome to the Family Law Cafe podcast. Today we have Rob Alleyne, who is an animal behaviourist. You might think, well, what's a connection with family law? I hope that in this podcast, Rob and I are going to talk about lots of times where animals really are part of the whole picture when parties are separating. So, Rob, firstly, I know that you are an animal behaviourist. I know you've written books, that you train other people to be animal behaviourists. You're a judge at Crufts, I think. So you have a huge history, and you've also presented a programme called Dog Borstal, which I know ran for I think quite a few, 3 series, 4 series, and you were in every series. So very knowledgeable about all things dog related. So welcome to Family Law Cafe podcast, and tell us about how you got into the work that you do.
Okay, so I suppose it goes back to when I was a child and we had a very naughty dog that eventually my mother couldn't bear and she got rid of him and broke my heart. And then finally when I was 18, she agreed to let me have another dog, and I thought, if this dog is not perfect, she'll do the same thing. So I enrolled in dog training classes and thought he's just got to be the best behaved dog. And I kind of just got bitten by the bug then and started working him, and then got into competition, and then it just kept going really well. And then I thought, actually, I could help other people with their dogs. This isn't just about me anymore. I could help other people not have to get rid of theirs. So that was kind of where it started, that belief now that I could actually teach other people to not have to give up their own dog should they find themselves in the same situation that we were in when I was a child. And it's just kind of kept evolving from there, just wanting to help more people help dogs.
Okay, so what was the first, did you go straight into this work as a first job, or what were the first things you were doing?
No,
Or
not
what
at
did you
all.
do initially?
I always wanted to work with animals,
Hmm.
but my parents were always totally against that. And so to kind of appease my parents, and this was back in the days of the first recession, where Maggie Thatcher had kind of,
I thought we meant 1929 though.
no, maybe I should say the second recession. I'm
Well,
old, but
first
I'm not that
ever
old.
recession. So yeah, we're
The
talking back
recession
in
in
the
the 80s.
80s. Yeah.
And in those days, it was just get a job,
Mm.
get a job. You need to bring in some income. I was 18 when I left school, and there were no jobs. So I just kind of went from job to job to job, just trying to bring in some income.
Mhm.
So I was 18 when I got that first dog. And so I first got a job in a courier service, which was part-time, but it meant I still had a lot of free time with the dog and to do training and stuff. And then that job didn't work out, and I went into another job and another job. But I was always kind of doing dog training in the background. And then once I started to get into more full-time work, I was training my dog in the evenings. I was going to dog training classes in the evenings. And back in those days, you could do dog training as an adult education class. And so I took over an adult education class on dog training. And that was my first school where I was actually teaching other people. I was
So how old were you then? Yeah.
22,
Okay, really
22.
young. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I kind of inherited the club. So the
Yeah.
person that ran it, I knew very well. And then she decided she didn't want it anymore and wanted me to take it over. So I certainly wasn't ready, and didn't feel ready to take a class over, but it was either going to close or I had to take it. So suddenly I found myself teaching other people, and found that I liked it. And actually, it's my favorite part of the job, because you can't really train dogs unless you can train the owners. So really, most of my work is involved in retraining the owners and getting them to see things a little bit differently. And then the dog just normally falls into place.
Mhm.
But the hard part is trying to get the owner to see that really they're the problem.
I know that you worked for London Borough of Lewisham,
I did.
and what was your role there?
So from 1990 to 2007, I was the animal welfare officer
Okay.
for the Borough of
So
Lewisham.
not just dogs then, all
So
animals.
that was all animals.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of calls, you picked up a phone and somebody said, can you help with this? And it could be a stray dog, it could be injured wildlife, it could be nuisance. It was anything to do with an animal.
Mhm.
And you just never knew from moment to moment what you were going to be asked to deal with. I've dealt with loose reptiles and vicious dogs and evil parrots and all kinds of things. Lots of
Evil
cases with
parrot.
people who had lots and lots of animals. So there was lots of hoarding cases we had in Lewisham, where you'd have to deal with people who had, 50 cats or 20 dogs. So you just never knew. But it was very interesting, but it could be really very challenging, because often, you went into kind of pretty awful accommodation.
And then at some stage, whilst you were doing that, you started presenting a program called Dog Borstal.
That's right.
So for those that don't know about Dog Borstal, because it's not running at the moment, I don't think, they repeated it for a while. So the premise effectively is that there is a dog that is out of control in some way or is behaving really badly, and that and there'd be 2 or 3 families, and they would go to the sort of remote part of England. I think it was in Norfolk somewhere, and there were 3 dog behaviourists. You were one of them, and so different techniques would be tried, different methods of training, and they would live there, the family with the dog, and the dog that would be there, and you would train them. And at the end, usually that dog was all fine. Is
Yeah.
that a fair summary?
It was kind of like a boot
Yeah.
camp where
Yeah,
the owners
boot
would come
camp.
along with their dogs. They would stay there for 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
They would arrive with a list of problems, and our job was there were 3 different trainers working with 3 different families, and we would each be tasked with resolving the issues that that family had. And then at the end of the week, an external examiner would come in to test the dog to see whether or not we'd resolved the problems that it had. So it was
Yeah.
pretty intense.
I can remember watching that program, and there might be a dog that sort of walked along the road, but if it saw another dog, it would just go, and sort of, and then you do little tests, and by the end of it, it would just be trotting along, not even looking, which seemed quite miraculous. So what was, I think there were different techniques that were being used. It was almost like there's not one size fits all. So
That's
what
right.
would you say? How would you describe your technique, if I?
So the other 2 were much more dog trainers,
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of think that everything is, if I give the dog a job to do, it'll kind of just be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I came much more from a behavioural background, where you had to look much more at why the dog felt the inclination to do that in the first place. What was motivating him to make that choice? And frequently that came back to the owner. Choices that the owner was making were making the dog then make those choices. And what I found was that by changing the owner, the dog would very quickly fall into line. But frequently, the biggest problem I find with what people think are the dog's problems is that the dog's not listening. All these things that he's doing are symptoms of his not listening. Where he barks at other dogs, do you try and tell him to stop? Yes, I tell him, but he doesn't listen. You've told him to get off the furniture. Yeah, but he doesn't listen. And so there's something going on between the owner and the dog where the dog says, yes, I know what you're telling me to do. I'm not stupid. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's usually a problem between the owner and the dog where the dog says, no, I'm fully trained. I know everything you want me to do, but there's something going on in our relationship that means I can disregard what you say. So I came at it from an approach that if I could change the way the dog saw the owner and saw, actually, you are somebody that gives me very good advice, I should probably take it, that those problems would resolve themselves much more.
Oh, that sounds so simple, but give me an
Isn't it
example.
simple?
That sounds so easy, like, just sort out the relationship. What did you find then when you were working with these couples? It was usually a couple, wasn't it?
It was
Yeah.
often a couple. So dogs tend to be either talkers or listeners.
Mhm.
The dogs that are kind of more natural listeners tend to be much easier to train. They just say, tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do my best to achieve that. But a lot of dogs are talkers. They say, well, I'd rather get you to do what I want. And those dogs tend to be quite, and I use this word that people often think of as a negative, which is manipulative. But the dog just says, no, somebody's got to organise this. And if you're not going to do it, I guess it'll have to be me. And the majority of the dogs that I'm called to see are those dogs who say, well, look, somebody's got to make this happen. And if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. So I find with that dog all day, and lots of the people watching this, I'm sure, will relate to this. All day, they have to ask him 3 times, get off the sofa. Come on, get down. Well, get down, get down, down, get down. Good boy. I said, no, he's a terrible boy. It took you 4 times to say it. Why are you telling me he's a good boy and giving him a treat? Well, because he did it. Yeah, but you did it after 4 times. If that was your child, by the second time, it would probably be in trouble. Why are you treating this dog better than you're treating your child? And that's why your dog is worse behaved than your child. So we have to have a little bit of a reset and look at all those things where the dog says, no, I don't have to, and turn that around. And then the training becomes easy because now the dog is a listener and not a talker.
How do you make a dog be a listener?
Well, the easiest way is to get it to believe that it's profitable to listen. Dogs are just like us. They expect to get paid. A lot of owners think their dog should just do it because it makes them happy. And that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
It doesn't even work with us. Our small children, you say, can you go and get that for me, darling? And the child runs off and gets it. By the time it's 10 or 11, it's, why can't you get it? You're nearer. And by the time they're 16, they just walk away as you ask.
Yeah.
We expect to get paid for the work we do. It's only when you're very small, you'll do it for nothing. And puppies are the same. Very small, they'll do it for nothing. As they get older, they start saying, I want to get paid. And if you don't pay them well enough, they'll find ways to pay themselves. And I think, like humans and every other species on the planet, there needs to be a balance between what I get if I get it right and what I get if I get it wrong. If I get really well paid for getting it right, and there's a negative about getting it wrong that really isn't very appealing to me, I'm much more likely to do this. And so that's the key in dog training, trying to encourage the dog to make the right choice, but also to make it aware that there are some negatives to making wrong choices that push it towards making the right choice. And that's really all dog training is. Ever so easy.
Ever so easy. Easy to say. And so not only did you do that program, then you work with individuals and you go into their homes, and now you train trainers. And what is the purpose of you training other people to do what you want to do?
So both as an animal welfare officer and as a behavioural trainer, it became clear that we were heading in a really wrong direction when it came to working and living with dogs, that we were getting it badly wrong. And we see this on the news every day. You know, I'm old enough to remember a time when they said, you know, a good dog never bites the hand that feeds it. Apparently now 80% of dog bites are on someone that the dog knows. They're all biting the hand that feeds. Why has this happened? What's gone wrong? And I think we've made the same mistake with our dogs that we've made with our children, which is we're ignoring bad behaviour, rewarding good behaviour, and hoping all the bad behaviour will just go away. And we're seeing how badly that's working. And now we've started doing this with this animal that can kill us. There's a whole movement towards positive only training, where you never punish the dog, you only ever reward it. And what we see now is dogs who by the time they're teenage are just out of control. So I was initially trying to fix those one at a time. I go out and see this client, try and fix them, and then what I realised is I was just pushing a rock up a hill. This was never going to work. So the solution then was to start trying to train other people to train them. So there was a network of people. And that's why I started the academy, to try and create more people out there, so that in a situation where I couldn't see that person, they were too far, or I just had too many bookings, I could refer them to somebody else who I knew would offer them the same style of training.
Yeah, because there's no, as I understand, no specific qualification that anyone can say, I'm a
Absolutely.
dog trainer, book me, and that person may or may not be suitable.
Well, you're absolutely right. As it stands now, there is no formal qualification to becoming a dog trainer. Anybody could do it. You could do it literally today. You could print yourself out some flyers and call yourself a dog behaviourist. And I've met lots and lots of people who just realised it was a good way to make a lot of money. So now I see lots of people who say, oh, I'm a dog groomer and a behaviourist. I'm a dog walker and a behaviourist. I'm a pet sitter and a behaviourist. And they just attach this ist on the end of their title and then charge people lots of money, because there's a perception that if somebody has an ist at the end of their title, they must be an expert. So they call themselves a behaviourist.
Yeah.
And they now charge 5 times as much money than they were ever making in their previous profession by calling themselves a dog behaviourist. And what they tend to do is just what we call manage it. Well, just go the other way. There's a dog coming, turn and go the other way. If there's somebody coming around your house and he's aggressive, just shut him in another room. That'll be £500, please. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing lots of clients who've just been given this terrible advice that was never going to work. I just had one phone me on my way here, and I said, well, the first thing you need to do is bin that behaviourist, because that's never going to work, you know. But yes, there are now people making lots of money just calling themselves this thing. And I meet clients who've often spent thousands getting behaviourist after behaviourist, or sometimes thousands just on one behaviourist. And a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, they're no further on than they were, and sometimes worse. So because at the moment as it stands, there is no qualification, because there is no national standard, it falls to people like me to just try and do our best to educate as many as we can.
Okay, so you sometimes go into people's homes, you obviously meet people who have a troublesome dog. Do you find that that situation may be because there is tension in the relationship or difficulties? What can you tell us about that?
Dogs like a simple life. They don't like drama. So as soon as you see this kind of drama with the dog, there's almost always something going on in the background that's compelling the dog to make those choices, particularly with aggression. Aggression carries a lot of risk. So dogs don't really want to get into an aggressive situation unless there really doesn't seem to be any other alternative. And certainly now, in the same time, we've seen more and more anxiety in people. We're seeing more and more anxiety in dogs. So separation anxieties is a really big one now. We're seeing people that in a lot of cases get a dog as a kind of security blanket for something. It's going to make me feel better because I haven't got a child or I haven't got a partner. I'll get this dog. And they lavish huge amounts of love and attention and support on this dog, which the dog learns to thoroughly enjoy. But then periodically that person goes out and the dog has no tools in how to deal with being on his own. And so often when I look at separation anxieties, I find that in the same way the dog has one, the owner has one too. And I say, and how are you when you leave? Oh, I find it very distressing. Or I try never to go out and leave him. And if I do, I only go to the shops, and all the time I'm out there, I feel terrible. And I see now how their anxiety is being mirrored back at the dog. He's becoming as anxious as they are. Sometimes in cases where there's perhaps friction between the owners, again, the dog often gets very anxious in that situation. And I'll see lots of cases where the dog favours one partner and says, if the other partner comes near me, particularly if we're having a row, the dog will get in the middle and try and keep that person away. Most generally, the male in the house. The dog will bond with the female, and if they start shouting, the dog will often get up from wherever he was and go and lie next to the female owner. And it's in preparation of what it looks like is coming. Mm-hmm. And then if the shouting and the hostility increases and then the man starts to walk towards her, the dog starts growling. He says, I know what's coming now, and actually I think I need you to stay back. Which, as I'm sure you can imagine, could cause real friction between the partners, because now the man also blames the dog. Look what your bloody dog's doing. Look at your dog. I pay the rent in this house and your dog thinks he can threaten me. And so it just escalates it even more. And of course, then the dog becomes more aggressive, the wife becomes more defensive, the husband becomes more hostile. Round and round it goes.
What about situations? I've had some of these where I had one where it just came out as sort of a passing comment. It wasn't really to do with the main aspect of the case, but there were partner had 12 chihuahuas, and I said, oh, that's rather a lot, and sort of got told, well, yeah, they were just kind of left in, and I had to deal with them. And then when I asked, could we maybe cut down on one or two, another two appeared. So it really seemed to be part of that dynamic. And understand, and then, you know, in that case I was dealing with a very hostile piece of litigation, but to me the flag was, well, someone who's going to buy two more dogs when you actually said it's a bit of a problem having these 12. It's a bit of a flag, isn't it?
Well, sometimes what's happening, or what can happen, is the dog actually becomes almost a weapon to use against the other partner. And if you feel perhaps that your partner might leave but for the animals, obviously the more animals you get and the more animals you have in your mind, the less likely they are to leave. Well, what's going to happen to all these animals? And I've certainly worked with cases where one partner has threatened the animals if the other person leaves. Well, you can leave if you want to, but if you do, I'm not going to be looking after these animals. They're going to have a pretty miserable existence. And of course it compels that person to stay. So then they'll call me in and say, can you help with the dogs, because this person doesn't help me and I can't do it on my own. And I say, well, not really. I can teach you how to train the dogs, but if that person is going to undermine the training, then it won't be successful. What we have to do is try and change that person. But it may well be that the animals from that person are part of their opportunity to abuse the other. So they don't want to resolve it because they want to continue to abuse that person, in which case I'll just say, probably time for you to leave. Take the animals with you.
Want to put in a different situation. I often deal with situations where, for whatever reason, the parties are co-parenting, so they might be co-parenting a child. And I had a person say to me, oh, the other party suggested we get a dog that can move between the houses and can help provide security for the child. As it turned out, the other person then got a dog without any consultation at all. It's quite a large dog, which was a bit too much for the child to handle anyway, and it stayed in one place. So I don't know if you've ever had that situation. I mean, could that be a good idea to have a dog that passes between two parents, and how would that work?
Generally, it's not a good idea to have a dog that goes from one home to the other. Dogs very much crave stability. They don't like change. If you look at most animals who have a territory, the only time they leave that territory is when the territory is compromised. Any other time, they'll stay there, rain or shine, good or bad. And dogs are very much territorial animals. So once he comes to live with you, he doesn't really like change. I get lots of owners who have problems because they think, well, I go around visiting all my friends, it'd be nice if I can take the dog with me. And the dog just gets really distressed because he says, I just want to stay in one place. So as soon as you start to try and move the dog between homes, that's unlikely to work very well. Sometimes, and it may be the case here, actually, particularly in a situation where you've got perhaps a relationship breakup, one person gets a dog to kind of get the dog to favour them, or the child rather, to favour their house more than the other person's house. Well, if I get the child a really cute puppy, it's not going to want to go back to the other partner's house because it's going to want to stay here with its puppy. And you hold the puppy up and wave its paw as the child's going down the pathway going, bye. And they're crying now because they want to stay with the puppy. So sometimes the puppy can be a real tool, and those are situations often where the person who's got the puppy isn't necessarily really invested in the dog at all. So the dog can lead a pretty miserable existence when the child's not there, because now this person's stuck with this dog that they really only want when the child visits. So sometimes the dog can almost be used as a weapon to try and favour one parent over the other. And then you start to get, well, of course, if you don't spend enough time here, I'll probably have to get rid of the dog. Oh, mum, wow. Can I spend more time with dad because he's going to get rid of the dog? And yeah, I've seen some pretty unpleasant things where the dog is just used as a tool and somebody doesn't necessarily want the dog at all. They just realise it's a very good bargaining chip. But certainly moving the dog back and forth is not generally good for the dog. No, you're more likely to get behavioural problems.
Yeah. And what about people who I just wonder sometimes when a relationship's not going well, they don't feel able to talk to the other party. It's almost as if they invest in the dog or in the animal, that their relationship with the animal is stronger than with the other party.
Well,
do you see
that animal becomes the only thing they have to fall back on, it becomes their best friend, their confidant. It's the only one they can really talk to about how they feel. They're embarrassed to talk to their family. They don't want to tell their friends because maybe some of their friends already told them he wasn't a good guy and so on. So this animal becomes the one thing that makes them feel safe and secure. And so you can develop what we call an overbond with the dog that's actually neither in either party's benefit. But yeah, certainly you can see that this dog sometimes is the only thing they have to fall back on, which can also make the partner resentful. Every time I look around you with that bloody dog, it's always the dog. Yeah, and I've known of cases where the dog has disappeared. He suddenly decided he would take it for a walk and it ran away. It happened to somebody I was very close to. They had a dog, they got this new partner. The new partner resented this dog because she spent all her time with this dog. And then one day, uncharacteristically, he decided to take the dog for a walk and then came back without it and said it had run away. And who knows what happened to it, but I suspect something nefarious. So yeah, that again can be a real big part, especially if a relationship's already starting to slide. Getting an animal can be an absolute disaster.
Is it something that people might do to shore up a relationship?
Sometimes, and we certainly see now a lot of younger couples now who aren't ready to get a child, get a dog. And then they find out that getting a child that bites is probably not a good idea.
But could it be a positive to have a dog before you have a child? Because I do think that there's a lot to be learning, caring for an animal. I'm not sure these days we're so close with our families that we even remember what it's like to bring up children. I don't know, could there be a positive? Looking after an animal first.
There are several positives. For us, the problem comes when they then do have a child, because the dog then gets demoted. And the dog recognises that this demotion only occurred when he arrived. And so you're more likely then to see the dog starting to resent this new baby. And we're seeing more and more cases now of dogs showing aggression towards the child because it recognises that it was the one that slept on the bed. It was the one that always got cuddled. It was the one that was always on the sofa. It was the one that always got all this attention. And now perhaps the parents don't have time for it because they've got a real baby. So the dog slides down the food chain and not surprisingly becomes very resentful. And if we think of animals, usually, if within a social group of animals, wolves or lions, somebody has a baby who wasn't supposed to have one, that baby gets gotten rid of. So the dog very quickly says, look, I appreciate it's your baby, it's not my baby. I don't have any allegiance to it. It's just a cuckoo in the nest. And so the dog, given the chance, will potentially get rid of that baby because it's not its baby. Many, many people, because they've made the right relationship with their dog, the new baby comes in and the dog recognises this is part of our social group now and adores the baby.
Yeah, so it's how you do it.
But maybe one or of the partners, and generally speaking, it tends to be the woman, starts to worry more about the dog hanging around the baby. He's always wanting to, and I'm just not sure, he just seems to want to get too friendly with the dog, with the baby. So I'll get called in to have a look at their relationship and see what do I think is happening. And often you look at the dog and you go, no, this dog clearly really just wants to be friends with the baby. He's not showing any symptoms of stress or anxiety. He just kind of seems to want to envelop it. But it can be very difficult for that mother, whose sole function now is protecting this new being, to say, okay, well, we'll chance it and see how it goes. So often they say no, and I've been lots of cases where that dog was the baby. A baby comes along and she wants the dog gone because she just doesn't see a reason to take a risk for an animal. And I'm like, but that animal was your baby 5 minutes ago. Yeah, but now I've had a baby, I see it as an animal. And so the guy still wants to keep it. And sometimes she now says, no, I just don't want to risk my baby. And he seems to want to get too involved with it now, which maybe he has to go. So it's a lottery. Sometimes it works really, really well. Sometimes it works really, really badly. Sometimes what we always hope is they'll contact us and say, we're planning on starting a family. How can we prepare the dog so that by the time the baby comes along, the dog doesn't resent the baby? But what I often get is, yeah, we're having a baby, it's due in a week's time, and we've noticed now he's growling at lots of children. Could you just wave that one thing you bring around with you and just make this perfect? Go, oh, no.
So presumably what you teach is the process, isn't it? You're teaching people the process rather than coming in and just being a troubleshooter.
Absolutely. And then recognizing that because it's not the same species as us, we can't just tell it. It's going to need time to recognize that things have changed. But often people don't allow that time. No, I can't have him growling at my baby if you can't fix it today. Well, he's got to go. So, well, did you not think to call me when you were pregnant? Well, yeah, we should have done, but we didn't. So what do you do now? So listen, I can't just wave it away. You're going to have to be prepared to give him that time. And sometimes they won't, which I always think is a really sad one because the dog had a wonderful life up until that point. Yeah. And now he's faced with rescue.
And going into a rescue, if he then does go to another family, presumably that's quite disturbing, all of that, to the dog.
And of course, if you've got a dog maybe who's already becoming hostile towards this child, when you put that dog in a house full of strange people and possibly another child, or maybe just a visiting child, it's more likely to show aggression because it's much more insecure. So actually, in some ways, the worst thing you can do is take a dog who's got an issue with your own child and put it in an unfamiliar environment because it's more likely to show aggression because of its anxiety. Let's keep it here and resolve that issue. You took responsibility for this dog. Let's resolve that so that the dog gets to stay. And that's always my goal, rather than moving the dog around.
So let's say there's a situation in which parties separate quite quickly, because sometimes that happens. There's every separation is different to the other, but there's somewhere, there's an instance where they separate really quickly, and let's say there's a dog or there's a couple of dogs. That's a pretty obvious question, I think, from everything you said, but that's going to have a big effect on the dogs, isn't it?
It can have a massive effect on the dogs. Dogs that are really happy and well-rounded. Somebody moves out, sometimes only temporarily. We just need a timeout, and one or both dogs become very distressed. Yeah. Either you move out, take the dog with you because you just need a timeout from your partner, and the dog cannot cope with being in this strange environment. He picks up on all your anxiety, everything's gone pear-shaped, and the dog becomes incredibly distressed. Yeah. Then when you come back, the dog recognizes that distress is still there because your issue with your partner is still unresolved. So all of that anxiety he had there comes back home with him, and he remains anxious, and maybe now for the first time starts to think, actually it's your partner that's causing the problem. It's whenever they come in, your whole energy changes. They're the problem. So yeah, sometimes these very quick, sudden separations can be extremely distressing for the dog too, and can lead to all sorts of other issues. Yeah.
It's interesting to think that if I'm dealing with as a lawyer, a dog will be a chattel, what's called a chattel, a belonging. And so a court, if it had to make its decision, it wouldn't be based on the feelings of that animal, the emotions. It would be based on, I suppose, things like ownership.
Yeah. So this is the first thing that comes up usually. Well, in theory, who is the owner? Mm-hmm. And as you say, the dog is just chattel. They say, well, he's just he's no different to a CD player or that chair. Yeah. So who does it belong to? Well, I bought it, I paid for it, but it was a present for him. Okay, well, who walks it? Well, he does. It's a big, powerful dog, so he walks it. And whose name's on the vaccination certificate? Well, he took it down because I work full time, so he took it. And the Kennel Club registration papers, whose name's on those? Well, that's in both of our names because we both went and looked at the same time. They go, okay, well, it's his dog.
Yeah,
it's his dog.
It'd be based on evidence. It would be evidence-based.
Absolutely, not emotionally at all. And sometimes that can be incredibly distressing for the owners. Yeah, because maybe she has got her name on the vaccination certificate, and she is the one who got it from the Kennel Club and put her name on the Kennel Club papers. But He walks it, he feeds it, he plays with it, da, da, da. So he feels he should have more right to the dog because I'm the one who does all the stuff with it. And the law, unfortunately, usually says, no, it's not your dog.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And in terms of, let's say people have separated, do you have situations where you feel people are acquiring a dog rather than sort of investing in a new relationship?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we see that a lot. So a lot of the kind of over bonding that I talked about earlier occurs in people for whom there's clearly something missing for them. So they've maybe broken up with a partner, they've been single for 18 months, they feel really down, so they get an animal. And they often attach a huge amount of investment in this animal. They love it, they take it everywhere with them, it sleeps in the bed, not on the bed, it's their absolute world. But it doesn't quite fill that void. So they get a second one.
Okay.
Well, that'll fill the void. If this one's filled it 2/3, this next one will fill it. So they get a second one. But because it's a dog and not a person, there are certain voids that it just cannot fill. So then they get a third and a fourth and a fifth. And the next thing you know, they've got 23. And they're still hoping this void will get filled, and it never will.
Happens, and it's not just dogs, is it? Obviously, you see these people with loads of cats, for example.
We hear the anecdote all the time,
Yeah.
don't we, about the crazy cat lady. She's got 50 cats.
Yeah.
But yes, certainly.
And usually women.
It is usually,
Yeah.
it's almost exclusively women. The only exception tends to be gay men. But it doesn't seem to be something, certainly that heterosexual men seem to feel a need for. They'll just go and get drunk or go to whatever, but they don't seem to feel that need to get animals. So there is something going on there that
I think it's something to do with
huge
trying to look after something.
Well,
women have obviously that impulse to care.
Yeah, and I think that it fills that void. The children have grown up and left, or my relationship has broken up, and I still feel the need to be looking after something, but I don't have anything to look after. And there's a feeling of kind of redundancy that will sometimes tempt those people to go and get an animal. But again, they tend to form a very strong overbond with it that actually can become quite destructive to both, but often more so to the animal, because he can't fill that void. And so there'll be shortcomings that he fails on. And then they'll call me in to try and fix it. So I'll often get called in for one with a separation. I remember not very long ago working with somebody who had a border collie that had a separation anxiety. And this dog, if she could have had it in her skin, she would have done.
Wow.
And when I talked to her about we need to break this overbond, she just burst into tears. But the neighbours were complaining about the dog barking whenever she left it and so on. So she knew from a practical point she needed to fix this. But her kind of angle was, can we fix it without changing my relationship with the dog in any way? No. So one of the things, the dog slept in her bed with its head on the pillow next to her. And I said, you need to first of all start to create some situations where you and the dog are separated while you're still here. And again, she just burst into tears. I said, I want you to move the dog out of the bedroom. She said, I don't think I can do that. If it was her partner, she would have no problems with them sometimes going out of the bed. But this dog, she said, no, I don't think I can move it out of the bedroom. And I said, well, I'm really not sure I can help you. It used to lie leaning against her on the furniture all the time. It was always in physical contact with her. And I said, I want you sometimes to just move yourself off of it. So there's just that bit of independence. She said, I love that. I don't know. And I said, look, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you because you're more overbonded to the dog than the dog is to you.
Yeah.
But it was, again, filling those voids in her mind that I was trying to break, and that was never going to work for her.
I wonder do you think she, at least something landed for her, something to think about?
I think she recognised that in order to fix this, she would have to do this. She understood that.
Just wasn't ready
but she
for
just
it.
wasn't ready for it. And in the end, what she did was she moved.
Yeah.
I'll have to move house so that the neighbours stopped
to a
complaining.
more remote. Oof.
I don't know where she moved to, but that was what her solution was. I'll have to move.
Wow.
She would rather move house than just separate us. I'm just saying from there to there, and she's like, can't do that. I said, just put its bed right outside the bedroom door, but that means a third of its day it will be spending not quite with you. She said, I can't do that.
It's her need, wasn't it?
And I said, you had children, haven't you? And she said, yeah. And I said, where did your children sleep? And she said, oh, that was my. So I said, you're quite happy to move your children down the hall. Wow. They had to have their own room. You've got to grow up. You've got to learn to be independent. You're going down the hall. And I'm sure when they were babies, they probably cried their eyes out being down the hall. But you kept them there because you felt that was good for their development. How is it you could do that for the child, but not for this dog. And she said, look, I hear everything you're saying, but I can't do it.
So one last area that I just wanted to touch on was I used to work for a firm, and we prosecuted people who were abusing animals. So we prosecuted for the RSPCA. And I was informed then about the link to people who abuse animals and abuse humans. Is that something that you know about?
I remember reading some research in, God, it's probably in the 90s now, where they were looking, and this was in the States, where they were looking at the correlation between, and this was only in men, who abused animals and then went on to abuse people. They started with animals. And they found that just over 80% of the men who abused people had started on animals before they got to people. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised to find it was a similar correlation here. Yeah. Although this was in America, yeah. I suspect it's probably pretty much the same here. Yeah. Because animals are seen in their eyes as easy. You know, he's never going to go and tell. Yeah. He won't grasp me. He'll keep coming back for more. Yeah. Back in my days as an animal welfare officer, I would go into houses where unspeakable things had been done to dogs. Unspeakable things like it would give you nightmares. And I would have to drag that dog out the door. He wouldn't leave. He was still 100% devoted to this person who'd done the most evil, horrible things. So for a lot of these people, a dog is perfect. I can do as much as I want to him, as often as I want to him, and he'll never complain. He'll never report me. He'll never get sick of it and leave. He'll come back time and time again. And if somebody tries to assault me, he'll still defend me. So you can see why a lot of them start off on animals, because our animals don't grasp. Animals are never going to tell. Even if you walk down the street and that dog's got cigarette burns in it, you can't ask the dog where he got them from. He'll never tell. So yeah, I think there's a really strong correlation. And I think a lot of abusers are essentially bullies. They're cowards who like to bully something. And an animal is a very easy thing to abuse. So I think a lot of them are attracted to abusing animals because they'll just put up with it. They'll just put up with it. And I've dealt with lots of cases where they didn't feel they were abusing the animal. And I would have to explain to them that they are, you know. Well, he peed on the floor, so of course I kicked him. You don't kick him, you train him. The reason he peed on the floor is because you haven't trained him properly. Kicking him is not the solution, training him. But in their minds, it wasn't abuse because he peed on the floor.
Or maybe they'd seen that and maybe...
Well, but they feel it's justified. Well, of course you give him a thick ear, he did this or that. And you go, he's just a dog. You haven't trained him properly. If you trained him properly, you don't have to hit him. Hitting him will not make him look back retrospectively and think, I wish I hadn't done that wee 12 hours ago. Because he's just a dog. You haven't trained him properly. And so it could be really difficult with those sort of people because they kind of like having something that they can just bully whenever they're in a bad mood or they've had a bad day. You know, it becomes very easy to do.
Tell me this, sometimes you see people, you can see, you might have a dog or you see a dog who just doesn't respond to them. Is that just folklore that you know that dogs seem to be able to tell character, or
certainly
what's happening there?
Certainly, many dogs are very good judges of character, and it's not unusual in a household for a dog to gravitate towards one partner or the other more than kind of equally. And I personally think it's much more to do with the personality of the people than who feeds it or who walks it, who provides the most for it. And frequently I'll get people complain because I do this for it, 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 and yet it still prefers them. Well, the dog will say it's because it's personal. I like them better. It can be sex specific, so you're more likely to find male dogs will form a very strong bond with female owners and vice versa. But absolutely it can go the other way. And I think it's much more to do with personality. It's who I like the best. You know, back when I was married, my German Shepherd, which are a breed that are known to overbond, I would go out the front door and she would immediately take up her place behind the front door. It was as close to me as she could get. That was the last place she saw me. And barring a need to go to the toilet, she would stay there all day. And nothing my then wife could do to lure her away would work. She said, no, I'm waiting for Dad to come back. She didn't want to go out for walks with her and so on. And so even though she had the prospect of a walk, she'd say, but I'd rather wait for him and go with him. So yeah, they can form very strong bonds that can sometimes make people a little bit resentful too. Well, I bought it, I feed it, I walk it. Why is it doing all this stuff for you? And that can make somebody a bit resentful of the dog.
Well, I'd love to chat all day. Can't,
Wouldn't it be lovely?
So many insights, incredibly helpful. It's been lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely.